Um, any other questions? Any other questions? Yes, you are.
Do you have, Kaya,
Kyle.
do you have any critiques for the vegan diet specifically in terms of GMO products and things like that? Like, is a local-based diet the best in terms of, because
Well,
I just could see arguments stemming even further, you know, to destruction of ecosystems.
well,
and
look,
GMO.
look. Obviously, do as little harm. I mean, you know, do as little harm as possible in life. That's a good rule to serve. So, to the extent that, I mean, you know, if you're a vegan and you have a choice between, I mean, the GMO thing is a we assume that GMO is unhealthy. It may be, it may not be. One of the things I find really interesting, I have actually a colleague at Rutgers who's written this really interesting paper I read recently, in which she says how bizarre it is that everybody's terrified about GMO stuff, but yet everybody's got a cell phone and is exposing their brains to radiation all the time, right? And so it just goes to show how you know, unclear we think. You know, we all have cell phones. Probably everybody in this room has one. So like, even if you know, even if you're not using it, you're not holding it to your head. It's on your pocket, and you're getting body radiation, all that sort of stuff. Nobody worries about that unduly, or at least you don't worry about it enough not to have the damn things. And yet. We worry about the health of GMO. I mean, I think GMO for me raises a series of other issues about like having corporations own rights to seeds and what they can do, you know, and the mischief they cause. I mean, I don't know whether GMO per se is unhealthy. I really don't know. I know that, you know, having Cargill and Monsanto and corporations like that controlling seed, you know, having them control the supply of food, that gets me nervous, but not because it's GMO, but because I inherently distrust those sorts of entities. And so, but you know, you should always do as little harm as possible. As a matter of fact, I spend a lot of time with the Jain community, which is an Indian community, and I'm really attracted to them. And part of what I really like about them, and I'm working on them because they're all vegetarians, but you know, many of them are not vegans because Jainism developed in India. In India, you have Hinduism, and in Hinduism there is, you know, the idea in Hinduism about, you know, Krishna is the protector of the cow, so we all exploit cows to honor Krishna. But and so a lot of Jains drink milk and use ghee, which is clarified butter, in their cooking. And so I've been spending a lot of time working with the Jain community, and I speak about this at a lot of their events. But I really like, I'm very strongly attracted to that because I love the fact that these people think about the idea of how do we reduce harm all the time, you know? Having said that, there's still a huge difference between building a road where you know that if it's got 4 lanes and it's 65 miles an hour speed limit, 10 people are going to die. You know that. When you build a road, you know you can get an actuarial from an insurance, you know, actuarials are people who sort of statistically will tell you, will use statistical models, and they'll tell you how many people will die on this road if it's 4 lanes and it's 65 miles an hour, and how many at 55 and how many at 75. There's still a difference between 10 people dying on the road that you build and you're killing 10 people. There's a moral distinction. So I think, you know, we have to, you know, one of the things that happens with a lot of these discussions is people say, well, you know, everything we do causes harm. And the thing is, yeah, that's right, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop harm wherever we can. And so, you know, anyway, sorry. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to let Mehmet go first because he's been waiting a while.
Hi.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Mehmet.
I'm sorry?
Mehmet.
Okay.
Not from here, so.
Okay. That's all right.
Yeah. First of
But
all,
you're Canadian.
No, I'm not.
I'm only kidding.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming on behalf of all the Prague Students for Animal Liberation members. And by the way, if you see someone with this cool bandana, they are members of us. So if you want to be involved and join us, you can find one of us and talk to us after the event. I really enjoyed your speech, but I have a question about violence, as you can imagine probably the way I find it.
Okay.
To this step.
Whatever, go ahead.
So my question to you is that you're saying, like not right now, but in some of your writings I have seen that you saying that direct action methods such as property destruction is antithetical to the goal of non-violence and equality for all. I totally agree with you about the equality for all aspect, but who says that animal liberation's goal is non-violence? I think violence varies, and violence of the powerful and violence of the powerless are different things, and they should be regarded
The problem with that is that in a society in which 95%, if not more, of people exploit non-human animals, everybody's an animal exploiter. So when you start talking about meat, and the reality is, look, capitalists, you have a capitalist selling beef, capitalist is indifferent, at least in theory, the capitalist is indifferent as to whether or not he or she is selling bananas or beef. If there's demand for bananas, they'll stop selling beef and they'll sell bananas. The ultimate problem with animal exploitation is us. We demand the stuff. And so when you start talking about, who's the animal exploiter, the problem is that, yeah, the capitalist is going to provide whatever is demanded, but we are the people who drive the demand. Now, I don't want to be simplistic about it, because industry helps to perpetuate our desires, and basically tells us, if you don't eat meat, you're not a real man, or you're going to get ill, or you're going to get osteoporosis and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is, ultimately, the responsibility is ours. And so, what I think is that, when you start talking about, whenever I get into these discussions, what I find is that people conceptualize the animal exploiter as the corporate, as the corporate entity, or the vivisector, or whatever. And the problem is that, look, we're the problem. I mean, if people really opposed vivisection in any serious way, it wouldn't happen. The reality is, most people sort of like, they might get squeamish about when you tell them about some experiment going on, but what they basically say is, well, look, they're finding cures, and and I need something to help all this high cholesterol I have because I eat this stuff. And so, if we all stop demanding it, they wouldn't supply it. They're capitalists. They are indifferent. All they want to do is make money.
I totally agree with you on that. But my question was about kind of philosophically asking what is wrong with violence. Because when people say violence is wrong, I think that argument sounds really essentialist.
Essentialist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally. So I'm not asking you this as a law professor, but philosophically, what is wrong with violence? Because I have nothing against violence, whether against property or human beings. I don't really see anything special about human beings. So I think violence is a means, and it's contextual and it's relative. So.
Well, I guess I would say, and this is something we could talk about for hours and days, but I would say to you that the idea that, I think your whole, what you're saying to me seems to assume that we can draw a line. You have to, there's the use of force in an arbitrary way would present a problem for you, right? No?
Still depends. Arbitrary, yes, it does. Yeah.
Arbitrary does. Good. Now, let me say then, is it all right? Is your mother vegan?
No.
Can I kill her?
No, I'm not. I'm not seriously. I'm not kidding. If you're seriously.
You're the first person I've ever met who said kill my mother.
Well, I don't really like my mother, but that's not.
Okay. Give me somebody. Is there anybody in your life that you like? Sibling, partner.
The problem is, I don't really see killing a non-vegan person and killing someone who is the symbol of a violence is something different. A vivisector.
That's pretty essentialist, don't you think?
Well, a vivisector has stands for something else. I don't really see them the same. So I don't know. For example, it's the difference between a soldier and the general who is preaching for war. Let's say.
Well, I don't think that analogy holds.
It's a bad analogy.
It is a bad analogy, and I do intend to find out where your mother lives.
Can you give the address? She's in Turkey.
Okay, fine. Introduction to Animal Rights has just been, in one of my books, has just been translated into Turkish.
It's been a while. It's been 10 years since.
No, that long?
Yeah.
Time goes when you're having a good time. But I think that, I understand what you're saying, but I just can't understand how when you have, we're not talking about slavery. We're not talking about race-based slavery, where you always had a huge portion of the population who was opposed to it. There was a lot of opposition. You have a situation of exploitation where the overwhelming number of people on the planet engage in it. I mean, we're talking about 95%. And so we're the people who drive the demand. And I mean, we're the people who drive the demand, and then the issue becomes I think it's essential is to say the farmer is the problem. The farmer, whether it's a factory farmer or a happy family farmer, the farmer isn't the problem. The farmer is just responding to the demand that we create. And so, now if you're willing to say it doesn't matter whether that you would, I mean, look, if you're willing to say I would support violence against my mother, or my lover, or whatever, if that person wasn't a vegan, then I say, okay, fine. I just, then you and I have to part company because, see, I think the problem is violence. I think we live in a world in which violence is so much a part of our lives, to me, violence is the problem. I do not believe that violence is going to be the solution. I don't think it's going to be any part of the solution, frankly. And I think that what ends up happening with some of these violent actions is, if you talk about, I mean, you're talking about the symbolism of things. So you're talking about the consequences of engaging in violence and what that means. And I would suggest to you, if you look at the consequences, what you see is that it actually alienates people more, because it's not 1830. Where violence might have had a symbolic effect in terms of the population with respect to slavery. It has no symbolic effect. As a matter of fact, when you've got a population of people who think eating animals is just fine, they don't look at violence and say, wow, this has raised my consciousness. They say, wow, these people are nuts. I just think, I mean, I don't know.
I think I talk too much, but really quickly, can I ask like a follow-up question?
Sure.
I think when we condemn violence, like let's think about a third world country, which the mining companies come to the villages and destroy those villages, and they build hydroelectric power plants and destroy the environment of the people, and the villagers are responding this with throwing rocks at the police and setting fire to these.
It's not an analogous situation.
I think isn't that violence?
No, well, it's violence. Yeah, and I'm not saying it's look.
Say that, I think you kind of marginalize that kind of resistance, that kind of
violence. No. Well, first of all, there's a prior question, which is, in situations of conflict, are there nonviolent ways of resolving it? I mean, it's funny you should raise this, because I was reading an essay by a guy who says that the Second World War is the example that that is always used. When somebody's talking against violence, they say, well, what about Hitler? Could you have solved that problem without violence? And the answer is, well, and his response was, Hitler, everybody knew Hitler was crazy, but because the West was so anti-communist and they were so frightened of Stalin, the West supported Hitler and allowed Hitler to gain power, because they thought he was going to be a bulwark against Stalin, against communism and Stalin. And it turned out, very, very differently, that the Allies had to, that the Americans and the British and everybody else had to reach out to Stalin to stop Hitler. But could the Second World War have been avoided? Because that's the example you always get. Everybody will say, well, yeah, you could avoid this, you could avoid that, you could avoid this. But what about the Second World War? And I found this essay really interesting, because I think that a lot of times we assume that things can't be solved without violence, but that's because we've conceptualized the situation and we've made certain assumptions that we didn't challenge in the first place. But anyway. So. Vincent, my friend Vincent from Ottawa, who came 6 hours.
Mine's a two-parter, but I'll go ask. What role do you think privilege, either male privilege or white privilege, plays in militant direct action, say, on behalf of African Americans? And do you think it's logically consistent to believe that sentient beings have absolute value, inherent value, and not commit to strict nonviolence except in self-defense?
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Okay. If I agree to inherent value of sentient beings, can I take any other position other on force, except that it's only justified in self-defense? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, and I know you well enough to know you never ask bad questions, and it's just, and I now feel inadequate and horrible that I'm not understanding. I think that male privilege in terms of the militant direct action movement. I think I mean, yes, I think it plays a big role, and I think that I found that, and I'm not addressing. I'm not talking about you. I never met you before, and I'm not addressing my comments to you. But I have found a number of the defenses of militant direct action to reflect that sort of privilege, and frankly, to not be. Yes, I agree with that. But the second part of your question, if I recognize animals as inherent value, as having inherent value, and let me explain, inherent value is not like a mystical concept. So everyone says, what the hell does that mean? Either have external value, extrinsic value, or inherent or intrinsic value. Intrinsic or inherent value is simply, I value myself even if you don't value me. That I am the sort of being who cannot be valued simply because, by you. I value myself. And so when we say we respect inherent value, what we mean is basically we respect the interest of the individual and the valuation of the individual, even if others don't value that person. So now if I have inherent value, what is my thing about?
Okay. If you've got inherent value, my claim would be, if I agree you all have inherent value, then the only time I could possibly really logically make you use force would be self-defense.
Yes.
Everything else would be.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely clear. That's absolutely, absolutely. Yes, you are.
Kaylee.
Kaylee.
So I was just curious what your stance is on Meatless Mondays. Do you think it's any different than the other campaigns?
I think.
Even if it was like Vegan Mondays, do you think that would be different
Well,
at all?
every week on my Facebook site, I have this thing called my website is abolitionistapproach.com, and then I have this Facebook site which is it's not a friend thing, it's not like I'm telling you where I am. I post things, and it's called the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. And every Monday I post this poster that says Happy Vegan Monday, Happy Vegan Every Day, Happy Vegan Life. And so I think Meatless Monday is nonsense. And the reason why I think it's nonsense for a number of reasons. First of all, I think it reinforces this artificial view that that there's a distinction between meat and other animal products, which I don't believe exists. Number one. Number two, it reinforces or promotes or whatever the idea that morality is something. Think about how speciesist that is. If I said to you, we've got a problem with racism. Actually, rape is increasing worldwide. Rape is, it's not, we haven't solved that problem. Indeed, the problem's gotten worse. And so, if we said, well, let's have rape-free Monday, or let's have racism is still a problem. So on Mondays we will not tell racist jokes. That everybody would say, well, that's insane because it's promoting the idea that morality is something you do one day a week. And that and we wouldn't do that in the human context. And I think that the fact that we do it in the non-human context is, to me, dramatically. It is a dramatic indication of speciesism, in my judgment. Now, I think that let me go further and say because a question you might want to follow up with. Or one might want to follow up with in that context is, well, what do you say to the person who says, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm not going to go vegan right away? And I have an answer for that, which is, first of all, if I have a conversation, this happens a lot. I have a conversation with somebody, and they say, you're right, you got me troubled, I'm thinking, but I can't go vegan right away. I would say, sure you can. What is it that's standing in the way of, you going vegan? Let's talk about it. You're worried about blah, 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 blah. And I have conversation. Now, if they say, look, this is great. I really appreciate the information. However, I don't care. I'm not going to go vegan right away. What, should I eat cage-free eggs? No. What you ought to do is is, you should go vegan right away if you believe it's morally, if you agree with my moral argument, you're morally obligated to do it. But if you don't want to do it, then what you ought to do is go vegan for, breakfast for, 2 weeks or something, and then you see you don't go blind, your arms and legs don't fall. And then you go vegan for lunch for 2 or 3 weeks, then you go vegan for dinner for 2 or 3 weeks. But I'm never going to tell anybody, I'm never going to say to somebody that it's okay for you to eat animal products. And I think the problem with the Meatless Monday and all that sort of stuff is that what the normative message it sends out is that we can continue to exploit while we simultaneously care about animals. And the bottom line is you can't. And somebody said to me once, well, but you were a vegetarian for 4 years before you became a vegan. Yes, that's right. I didn't know what the hell a vegan was. I mean, it was 1978. That's a long time. Were you even born in 1978? No, you weren't. Okay, I was an adult in 1978. Okay, and so I didn't know what a vegan was in 1978. And I thought, I thought if I was going to be vegan, well, first of all, I didn't even think about the option because I never heard the word. And so I thought, well, I'm not eating meat. I remember when I told my mother I was becoming a vegetarian, she cried. She said, you're going to die, you're going to, I like my mother more than he likes it. But, and so I think that I didn't even know what that all meant. And so, and when I was educated about it, and I will be, I'm critical of PETA, but I'm the first one to say, the person who educated me about it was Ingrid Newkirk, who was the disease control officer of Washington, D.C., when I was clerking for Sandra Day O'Connor on the United States Supreme Court, and I found a dog that had been killed, or hit by a car. The dog died, but the dog wasn't dead yet. And the dog was in the street, and I went out, and I picked up the dog, and I brought the dog into the court, and I called the Washington Humane Society, and they sent over Ingrid Newkirk, and she came to my office. The dog was dead by then, and I was really upset emotionally. And she said, you really care about animals? And I said, well, yes, but you don't have to care about them very much to sort of go out and pick up a dog that is hit by a car. She said, you ought to think about becoming a vegetarian. And I said, I am a vegetarian. And she said, for ethical reasons. And I said, yes. And then she said, my boyfriend and I have just started a new group called People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And I said, okay, why don't you come over on Friday night and let's talk about, because I don't know anything about this animal rights stuff and whatnot. And she came over with her then partner, Alex Pacheco, who had just started PETA, and we spent all night up talking about these issues. And at some point during the night, Ingrid went to the refrigerator and she screamed that, what is this cow, I can still hear her, what is this cow pus doing in here? And I sort of got up and I walked over, and she, by that point, was pouring the milk down the sink. And, and so I said, well, why are you doing that? And she said, I said, they don't kill them for that. And she said, what are you talking about? She said, do you think they die happily of old age? And I said, well, gee, I don't, I said, but at that point, I'm in New York, I never saw a cow at that point, right? And so I didn't know I didn't realize that cows had to be pregnant to give milk. I thought they did it automatically, and I didn't realize, like all other mammals, they have to be pregnant. And so, so I said, well, but they don't, and then she proceeded to tell me about, with the horrors of dairy and stuff like that. And then, and she was telling me, and she was taking that, because I lived on ice cream at the time. I stopped eating animal product, I stopped eating meat. But what I did was I ate huge amounts of ice cream. I used to eat like 6 gallons of ice cream, and half gallons of ice cream. Breyer's Rocky Road or whatever it was. I used to eat tons of that stuff. I mean, it's amazing, really. If I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken much better care of myself. But I would, and so we're having this conversation, and Ingrid's taking the ice cream and she's throwing it into the garbage disposal. Then she's taking the eggs and she's putting them down, and I'm watching her do this, and I'm thinking, I really nothing to say to this. So therefore, if I take morality seriously, I can't really stop her. And we had a really interesting discussion, and that was it. That was a Friday night in October of 1982. I have not put animal products into my body since that night. It wasn't a question of, well, I'll phase it out. It was a question of, she had confronted me with something. And that something she confronted me with is, you say you take morality seriously, you're full of it. You're eating these animal products. And I basically said, but aren't I going to die if I don't eat them? No, you're not going to die if you don't eat them, and blah, 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 blah. And I stopped eating them. So you know what? I'm really critical of PETA, but I'm grateful that Ingrid basically, read me the riot act. act that, and I basically said, you're being a hypocrite and an idiot, and you're making moral decisions which are so unsound because you think that cows don't need to be pregnant to give milk. Educate yourself. It's your responsibility to educate yourself, is what she said. You know what? She was 100% right. So even though I really don't like PETA, I think that, and I work with them, I contributed I did pro bono work for them, which means I did not charge them money. I did pro bono work for them for well over a decade. And ultimately, we ended up parting ways for two reasons. One is Ingrid believed, and PETA believes, and a lot of people are upset about the fact that PETA kills a lot of animals. They take in animals at their Norfolk shelter, and they kill like 95% of them. That ain't new. I mean, when Ingrid was working, and this is not like private information. This is stuff you can find. I mean, Ingrid has always believed, like Peter believes, like Bentham believes, that killing an animal painlessly is not harming an animal. So she used to go into the Washington Humane Society in the morning, and she used to kill pit bulls all the time. She used to kill them. She used to call it euthanasia. I called it killing, because euthanasia is death in the interest of the being. Death is never in the interest of a healthy animal, human or not. And so she used to kill these animals, and we had a problem. And initially, in the beginning, I didn't have a problem with this because I didn't really understand this stuff. And it was only later on, and then she and I had issues about killing healthy animals, and the other issue was sexism, because I believe that as long as we are treating women like meat, we will continue to treat animals like meat. And so I don't believe that by commodifying women, and I'd rather go naked than wear fur, and all this nonsense that PETA does, and I believe that PETA's campaigns are not only sexist, I think all sexism is misogynistic, but I think that some of these campaigns are so deliberately misogynistic, and I think it's terrible. And I object to it. I have objected to it. When it was first announced, when she first announced it in 1989, I said, this is crazy. What are you talking about? And I continue to believe that. Anyway, yes. What is your name?
Lori.
Lori.
I wanted to ask you a question about your perspective on, and you mentioned that you're not a fan of the not-for-profits, the bloated not-for-profits like
The
PETA.
bloated corporate charities was my expression. Why do you infer that I don't support them? Just because I call them bloated corporate charities?
And so my question is about the farm animal sanctuaries. In light of your emphasis on going vegan, my perspective is that those organizations are particularly the farm sanctuary, and we have some in Canada as well. So what's your perspective on
Look,
them?
I've known Gene Bauer and Lori Houston. I guess Lori's not involved in that anymore, but I mean, I've known those people for a long time. And I like a lot of these people. I just disagree with them. The problem with Farm Sanctuary, as a particular organization, is that they stopped being a sanctuary a long time ago, and they're now in the business of promoting welfare reform. And so, as a logical matter, if somebody walked, Farm Sanctuary was one of the signatories of that letter that Peter sent to Whole Foods in 2005, which I think was, as a historical matter, disastrous. Farm Sanctuary signed on to that letter that they expressed appreciation and support for the pioneering happy exploitation program of Whole Foods. That would mean that if one walked into Farm Sanctuary and killed one of the animals that Gene has there, why would that not be perfectly acceptable? Because they're promoting the idea that eating animal welfare rated meat is a morally good thing. What would be wrong with that? The problem is that all of these organizations, they become businesses. They become businesses. And so you get an organization. It's not enough to be a sanctuary. You've now got to grow, and you've got lots of employees, and you've got to bring in money. And what happens with charities is that, and this is not like rocket science, but what happens is with these charities is, you need to have as broad a donor base as you can, so that you can what these organizations do is, PETA wants to be able to get you as a donor. If you're a vegan, or if you're somebody who just cares about animals but doesn't want to discuss veganism, they've got to sort of figure out a way to get you. So, there was an interview done of Dan Matthews a couple years ago that I wrote about, in which Dan said half of the people half of our members are not vegetarians, and the other half think it's a good idea. Well, that tells you a lot. He didn't even use the word vegan. He said half of them are not even vegetarians. And so what that tells you is they're trying to appeal to that donor base. My view is, to hell with that donor base. Let's, you know, I mean, let's. I don't mean to sort of sound, you know, uncaring about vegetarians, but I mean, it's like I wouldn't tailor my message to, you know, making sure that the donor base was big enough to sort of get in all the people who think it's a good idea and you know, but aren't even vegetarians or vegans. I think that's problematic, and I think that all of these organizations do the same thing. I mean, they all do the same thing. They all try to maximize their donor base by watering down the message. And what they end up doing is not only do they not end up doing good things, they end up doing counterproductive things because they send the wrong message out there. And when they say, oh no, we're not normatively, we're not saying as a moral matter that you know, animal welfare rated meat at Whole Foods is a good idea. The answer is, sorry, if you use English as a native language, writing to John Mackey in a public letter signed by Peter Singer saying that we express our appreciation and support, to say that that's not normative approval is crazy. And so, and I think that, you know, and I have discussed this with some of these people, and I saw Gene not long ago, and I like Gene, he's a nice guy, but I just think he's wrong about this. And I think that, you know, that these organizations have gone in the wrong direction. They've become businesses. Everybody always says, well, you know, if only the animal movement had more money. Problem with the movement is not money. It's not money. HSUS is taking in $130 million a year. PETA is taking in, I don't know, PETA USA, not even they're taking 34, I mean, I haven't looked at the 990s recently, but they're taking in a lot of money. Problem ain't money. Problem ain't money, it's lack of vision. Yes, your name is?
Taylor.
Taylor, hi.
Hi. First, I would like to also thank you for coming, and I have a great deal of respect for you. I've used a lot of your work in my own work.
Is there a butt coming? I need to ask you. Is there a butt? Go ahead.
Maybe a little bit.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But no, I do have a great deal of respect for you and your work, and like I said, I've used a lot of it myself. This is more of a comment, I guess, than a question. But yeah. I have a problem. I think it's problematic to simply just criticize other people's works in the movement, and I think. Personally, I think that in the movement, being an activist myself, you know, like your criticisms, I completely agree with a lot of them in terms of PETA.
So what's wrong with making them?
The point that I'm trying to make is the fact that PETA myself, I saw a video when I was 13 years old that changed me. So I think that while some of their work could be problematic, it still touched me. And things like Farm Sanctuary, for instance, I also know a lot of people who weren't vegan and who have went there, and regardless of the fact that they do some quote-unquote welfarist type ideology, I think that they've changed a lot of people to veganism. So I just think, and to say
really?
Say the idea about, you know, people are making money off of this kind of thing, like a lot of people have made money off of selling books and that sort of thing, talking about veganism as well. So I think that it's just problematic to simply kind of slew off other people's...
First of all, money I make with books.
Oh, I don't just mean you,
Okay.
I mean, no, I mean anybody in the movement, like people who have written books or anything like that.
You know how much money you make on books?
Probably not a lot, but I'm just,
probably
my
like
point
not
is,
a little less than 130 million. But let me say this to you. The argument that, well, we ought not to criticize them because they have had some good results, and the answer is, well, Jesus God, with the amount of money these people take in and spend, let's hope they do something. Let's hope that there is some good consequence from the amount of money they take in and what they do. Let's hope. My view is if you look at what these organizations are doing, I think they're being not only not productive, they're being counterproductive. I think they're sending out the wrong message, so that for every person who goes vegan, you know, there are a lot of people who aren't going vegan because, I mean, you know how many emails, one of the emails I get and PMs that I get fairly regularly is one that says more, and they basically, it's remarkable that the messages are very similar, of people who say, I was involved with this organization, and they, you know, fill in the blank, for many years, and no one ever talked to me about being vegan. And, you know, I found your site, I read your work, it pissed me off in the beginning. I love it when people say, you know, I read your stuff, it really upset me, and then I started thinking about it, and it occurred to me, you were right, and I need to go vegan. And so the thing of it is that these organizations, people can die in these organizations. I mean, you can join some organization. Nobody's ever going to ask you to go vegan. No one's ever going to challenge you to go vegan because they don't want to do that, because they don't want to take the risk that Taylor is going to say, I'm not going to give him the contribution. So has Gene done some good at Farm Sanctuary? Sure he has. You know, how many millions of dollars has he taken in? How many millions of dollars has he spent? And how many, yeah, of course he has, Is there some good that comes of it? Sure, there's some good that comes of it. Is it what we want as a basic ideology in terms of the animal movement? I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I think these organizations are incredibly irrelevant. And so my view is that if this is ever going to change, it ain't going to happen as a result of these corporate charities. It's going to happen as a result of grassroots movement of people like us, the people sitting here, the people, the students, the people like, what was your name? No, Emily. These people who are going to change the world because they're going to get out there and they're going to do stuff. They're going to get out there on the weekends. They're going to table. They're going to give people vegan cupcakes so that they see that we don't just eat styrofoam. And we're going to educate people. And I think that's how we're going to change things. We're not going to change. These organizations have an inherent inclination not to want to change things. They want to keep the issue very unfocused and very general so they can get you and you and you, wherever you are, they can get you. But it's not even a question of getting you and then moving you along. It's a question of getting you and making sure that they can continue to get your contributions. And so, yes, if you call PETA, they will say, oh yeah, we're in favor of people going vegan. But then Ingrid comes out and endorses Bell and Evans chicken. Bell and Evans is a big chicken producer. And Ingrid made a statement, which is on the Bell and Evans website, Taylor, in which she says, Bell and Evans has shown that good animal welfare is consistent with good business. They're changing the industry. Now, what does that say to all the people who really don't sort of focus on the fine points? It basically says, Ingrid Newkirk from PETA, stamp of approval on consuming chicken. I think that's just dreadful. I've got to get to the airport because I've got to get out of here. I really appreciate, thank you very, very much for having me. Yeah, that's